on 938 Live. This is Talkback.
Now, Singapore's demand for foreign domestic workers or maids is increasing. Manpower Ministry figures show an increase from over 209,000 in 2012 to about 214,500 in December last year. But how many of us actually stop to think about what getting a job as a foreign domestic worker in Singapore really entails? Now, you would have seen news reports of employment agencies here reducing their fees for hiring domestic workers in order to attract employers. About 6 months ago, it cost a Singapore employer an average of about $1,600 to hire a maid. Now, some agencies are charging as little as just $300. Now, this is only possible because they're passing on the recruitment costs to the maids themselves. The foreign domestic workers are reportedly paying the agents twice the amount they used to, from about $2,000 before to $4,000 now. And while they are paying off what they owe, many maids may go without pay or earn $10 to $20 a month for even longer periods. Now, under the Employment Agencies Act, agents in Singapore can charge workers recruitment fees of only up to 2 months of their salary. Most maids earn a monthly salary of about $500. So do the math. It should be only about $1,000, not $4,000 that the agencies charge the maids. One of the reasons that agencies are competing on price is the large number of agencies here. It's estimated there are more than 1,000 of them. Low rates are obviously a unique selling point. Some agents, however, say that the recruitment fees have gone up because overseas agents have upped their commissions. However, high fees could have serious repercussions on the supply and retention of foreign domestic workers here.
Now, according to the Manpower Ministry, only 42% of maids who were placed by employment agencies between February 2011 and February last year stayed in the job with the same employer for a year. And this, even though a standard contract is 2 years. Now, can such costs be controlled? And if so, how? If not, who should be footing the bulk of recruitment fees? The maids themselves or the employers? Do you care how much your maid has to pay in order to be able to work for you? And would you pay a higher placement fee so that she doesn't have to? Industry players say many licensed agencies have good practices and don't pass on the costs to maids. The Manpower Ministry has a list of licensed agents on its website. If you'd like to, you can check this list and only go to licensed agents.
But do you? How discerning really are you? And would you pay more to use the services perhaps of a licensed agent that operates ethically? Call us on 669-11938. You can also, of course, talk to us on Facebook, official 938 Live. Joining us today, our president of the Association of Employment Agencies Singapore, Jayaprema. She's on the line with us. And Jolovan Wham is in the studio. He is executive director of the Humanitarian Organization for Migration Economics. Thanks for joining us, guys. Now, first of all, I know that under the Employment Agencies Act, agents can charge workers recruitment fees of up to only 2 months of their salary. Most maids earn a monthly salary of $500, so they should be paying about $1,000. Why are some ending up with a bill of $4,000 now? Jayaprema, could you weigh in on this? Perhaps give us a breakdown of the costs involved in the placement of the domestic worker.
We do agree that the MOM has legislated for just 2 months to be paid, to be charged to the domestic workers as agency fees. But the legislation itself has limitations because what we are looking at is the agency fee is what is fees that we charge the domestic workers as a service fee. But there is another component to this charges that is being levied on the girl, that is the source country agency fees. And this is the fees that seems to be uncontrolled at this point of time. It can range anything from 0 to up to another 6 to 8 months. So that is why you see that the figure has become exorbitant. What is being charged to the girl is exorbitant. What
are the real costs involved, Jayaprema? I mean, these overseas agencies in the source countries, what are they charging for exactly?
Okay, it can start as, even the girl's personal documents. Like there are agencies who assist them to do their birth certificate, their passport, up to processing, training, and then their passageway to Singapore, their air flight ticket. During the training period, the girls do stay in the training center for some, and they actually feed them, they train them. They have to undergo a test. So there is many costs involved when we are actually speaking about source country fees.
However, are the costs exorbitant in spite of the breakdown you've given me? Is it still too much considering what they're charging?
I will definitely say that it is exorbitant because if you look at it, we are dealing with countries like Indonesia, we're dealing with countries like Philippines, Myanmar. Their cost of living is kind of low, actually. So if you're looking at housing a girl for a period of time and providing her with training through a trainer, how much can it cost, actually? So definitely the source country agencies are overcharging the Singapore agencies. And that is one of the reasons why the placement fee itself has been, increased to something like 6 to 8 months.
Before we get to the question of who should be footing the bill, Jolovan, what are your thoughts on this? It sounds like even the Association of Employment Agencies in Singapore has acknowledged that these agents overseas are charging exorbitant fees. So what can really be done about this?
Well, there are regulations in these sending countries with regard to charging fees. In the Philippines, for example, if you are a domestic worker coming to Singapore to work or anywhere around the world to work, the agencies there are not supposed to charge the worker at all. So there has to be more active enforcement of the legislation in these sending countries as well.
Zero placement fee. Jayaprema, is this really being practiced on the ground in the Philippines as far as you know?
Okay, there are many agencies in Singapore and licensed agencies in the Philippines who do practice zero placement fee. However, it is increasingly becoming very difficult to follow such practices because there are so many out there who actually do not observe this practice.
Jolovan, you mentioned enforcement. What kind of enforcement, can be issued across the board and across different territories?
Well, domestic workers then need to be empowered to file complaints. In fact, Wham has started this process of assisting these women to file complaints when they return to their countries of origin for placement fees that have been for fees that they've been overcharged for. So,
and what sort of recourse or restitution have they been offered? What sort of restitution are they given?
What typically happens is that there will be a mediation conducted between the agent and the worker, and then there will be a mediated settlement. If the mediated settlement doesn't happen, then the case goes up to court. So there are mechanisms for redress for this, but the domestic worker has to go through the Philippines Overseas Employment Administration system in order for them to.
And that will cost them money.
Yes, they will cost them money, but it will also give them the protection that they need.
Right.
Because the reason the POEA was established in the Philippines was to protect its nationals going abroad.
That's right.
But the Singapore authorities obviously have no power over this process, right? It is up to the source country authorities.
Yes, that's right. But the Singapore government can go into bilateral agreements with the Philippines to respect its procedures and its laws. The problem now is that the Singapore government, the Manpower Ministry, views this whole issue from the perspective of the free market. So they believe that it's a willing seller, willing buyer kind of market, and that they should not be making interference into the market by having regulations and protections for these women. And I find that very problematic.
Before we get to talking about bilateral arrangements that could be feasible in terms of preventing these overseas agencies from overcharging the foreign domestic workers, let's talk about what's happening here. Now, the Ministry of Manpower has licensing conditions. The Employment Agency Act says that agents can charge workers recruitment fees of only up to 2 months of their salary. The agencies are saying that, yes, that's the local fee. We can't do anything about what the foreign employment agencies do and the types of so-called loans that the maids take up with the foreign employment agencies. But can't MOM take any action against the Singapore agencies that are passing on these excessive costs to the maids, Jayaprema?
Well, we practice free market here. So as far as MOM is concerned, they will just look at what is the fee that you are charging as an agency. And if you can show proof by your paperwork, if you can provide an invoice from the source country agent, or you can show that you have actually transferred payment overseas for whatever that we have paid the source country agent, it stops there. So
right, it's above board. It looks legal for sure.
Yes,
right?
Exactly.
But can the Association of Employment Agencies perhaps take any action against Singapore agencies that are passing on these costs to the maids?
Okay, I think beyond looking at just talking about taking actions, I think there is many parties here who are responsible for what's going on. We have a lot of unlicensed agencies, agents who are walking around, doing direct business with employers. So it is what can the employment association of employment agency do? What we have been doing is we have been educating licensed agents. We have been educating our own members.
Do licensed agencies routinely operate differently? Do they routinely operate more ethically, perhaps?
Many do. They are very much more ethical. However, we are facing very unhealthy competition, and we are business people. So it is increasingly becoming very difficult to carry on business in this current environment.
Let's talk about how many unlicensed agencies there are. Earlier I mentioned that it's estimated there are more than 1,000 active agencies here. So give me the breakdown. I mean, what's your estimate of the unlicensed ones vis-a-vis the licensed ones?
Okay, if you're looking at unlicensed agents, everybody here is practically an unlicensed agent. You can look at foreign domestic workers, foreign workers who actually pass on biodatas to employers directly. You're looking at people who operate from home, housewives. Even I heard about it yesterday. She's a nurse. She actually provides nursing services to the family, and she's actually recommending domestic workers to the family as a foreign domestic worker to work with them. So there's no limitations to what is happening here. So I can say that everybody can become an agency here or an agent, because the process here is very, 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 very simple, very, very, very easy to actually hire a domestic worker.
However, the MOM does say that you should go to a licensed agent, and the MOM has a licensing regime for the agents. In fact, they even have a list of agencies who are licensed and a list of agencies whose license have been revoked due to several infringements of the Employment Agencies Act as well. So all these things are being done, yet at the same time, we've got a whole bunch of people who are acting as employment agents without being licensed. Isn't there enforcement taking place there to prevent this from happening?
It is not easy to enforce, because what we're looking at is MOM is actually recommending that an employer should go to a licensed agency, but they cannot force an employer to go to a licensed agency. So it is really the choice of the employer who they are going to hire through.
And also, it's a demand and supply issue, right? So if more of you decide to pick up the services of unlicensed agents and agencies that don't operate quite ethically, then, of course, they will continue to grow in numbers. Call us on 669-11938. Tell us if you would do the due diligence. How do you feel about the fact that some of your foreign domestic workers are picking up the bulk of recruitment costs? Would you be willing to pay for them yourself? Do you think that is fair? Call us on 669-11938. We'll talk to you in just a moment. Thanks for joining us on 938 Live on Talkback today, talking about how many of us actually stop to think about what getting a job as a foreign domestic worker in Singapore really entails. Now, employment agencies in the source countries charge the workers a lot in terms of placement fees, and a lot of these workers come to Singapore with big debts that they end up paying off with their small salaries that they get here. So, in other words, many of them end up only getting about $10 to $20 a month, or maybe no salary at all, as they are paying off what they owe to those overseas agencies. Now there's a pretty worrying trend when it comes to the employment agencies in Singapore. They are passing on that loan to the maids themselves. So the maids end up in that situation. Would you, as an employer, consider footing the bulk of the bill? Or do you think that if the maids are exploited in another country, it is certainly not your responsibility to be paying off the costs of exploitation? Tell us what you think. 669-11938. We'll talk to you right after the news and sport.
On 938 Live, this is Talkback.
Thanks for joining us on 938 Live's Talkback. I'm Bharati Jagdish with Andre Achak. Now, our demand for maids is increasing, but how many of us stop to think about what getting a job as a foreign domestic worker in Singapore really entails? Now, about 6 months ago, it cost a Singapore employer an average of about $1,600 to hire a maid. Now, some agencies are charging as little as $300, and this is only possible as they are passing on the recruitment costs to the maids themselves. There are regulations under the Employment Agencies Act. Agents in Singapore can charge workers recruitment fees of only up to 2 months of their salary. But one of the reasons that maid agencies here say that the recruitment fees have gone up is because overseas agents have upped their commissions. We're joined today by President of the Association of Employment Agencies Singapore, Jayaprema, and Jolovan Wham, Executive Director of the Humanitarian Organization for Migration Economics. Now, Jolovan, this cost that is incurred by the foreign domestic worker in her home country and with the foreign agency, this is not a new thing. They've always had to face these costs. They've always had to pay off these loans. Why has this become such a big issue right now, though? How is it being calibrated so that it is resulting in this situation that seems rather unfair?
The reason why it's become a problem is because we don't have sufficient legislation and effective legislation to cap these fees. So the
fees from the overseas agencies.
The fees from the overseas agencies, and also the fees that the workers here have to pay.
Earlier, I mentioned that about 6 months ago, it cost the Singapore employer an average of about $1,600. So, in other words, the Singapore employer was footing part of the bill for the overseas agent's fee, right?
Yes.
So now it's become an even worse problem because the agencies are not even charging, some of the agencies anyway, are not even charging the employers for this. They're just charging the maid. So that's something that I think we need to discuss. Would it be realistic to expect Singapore agencies to work with only licensed and accredited overseas agencies in order to keep those costs down?
It's important for the agencies based here to work with the licensed agencies there, because this is the only way in which we can protect both employers and the workers. But because there is little incentive, for Singapore agencies here to do that, because there is no legislation which says that if you work with an unlicensed recruiter in the Philippines, you'll be penalized for it, or if you work with an unlicensed recruiter in any country which are allowed to source domestic workers from.
You should be penalized for it. So there needs to be some form of disincentive or incentive to work with a licensing.
Yes, that's right.
Let's see what you have to say about this situation. We've got Reza joining us now. Hi, Reza. Good morning.
Hi, good morning. Well, I would like to just highlight a little bit here. I mean, what I like to say is that with regards to not domestic workers, but like all those workers who are working in the shipyards and so on, because I myself, I had an experience back in about 5 to 7 years ago. We went with an agent, to India to get some workers down to Singapore to work. But what they do is that they charge those workers, and they also pay a bit of a sum, like in thousands of dollars per person, to the agent in Singapore. And then the agent in Singapore distribute the money with the company that is going to hire the workers, So, but I'm not too sure is this happening with regards to the domestic workers as well. But this is what they practice in those, in these lines, like hiring people to work in the shipyards,
Right.
So,
I understand. Bangladeshi workers, all sorts of workers from various countries, many of them also construction workers, end up paying a lot of money to middlemen, recruitment agents to get a job here. Now, Jolovan, what do you think can be done about this state of affairs, where a lot of it is happening overseas? Singapore authorities may not have complete control. You mentioned earlier that more can be done on a bilateral basis to ensure that workers are not charged exorbitant fees. Tell me more about how you think that can be done exactly.
I think for a start, we should only approve the work permits of workers who go through the legal recruitment channels in these countries, because migrant labor export countries like the Philippines, Bangladesh, India, they have their own rules and regulations in relation to ethical and legal recruitment. And but at the moment, we don't have any bilateral agreements to only approve the permits of those who go through these channels. So I think as a first step, this is something that can be done.
Jayaprema, you've said before that also education is important, and two groups of people need to be educated. The domestic workers themselves, so that they know to go to only agencies in their home countries that operate above board, and the employers here in Singapore. Tell us more about that.
Yes, definitely. I think what we are speaking about here is that though there can be legislation from the source country, there can be legislation locally in Singapore, but the two parties who are involved in this whole recruitment process is the employer and the domestic worker herself. Now, if they were selective, they exercise their discretion to ensure they only go through licensed agencies when they engage or they're going to be hired by an employer, I think a lot of problems can be solved. Because currently what is happening is the domestic workers themselves who come from all these source countries, they prefer to go and work with, village heads, friends, relatives. So their rights are not being protected. They are being misguided, misled. Likewise in Singapore, the employers choose to deal with unlicensed agents, domestic workers who introduce candidates. What is happening is, over here we have no accountability from all these people who are unlicensed. So if actually both parties, both the employer and the FTW, decide to be engaged through a licensed employment agency, we have two parties who will be accountable. That is licensed employment agencies in Singapore and from the source country. And it will be definitely easier for the authorities to monitor this, smaller group of people. So we can't keep blaming the employment agencies, and we can't continue to blame the authorities. But I think responsibility... But
let's face it, some of the employment agencies are lowering their prices to the employers because they're competing on price point rather than on quality.
Quality, yes.
So that needs to certainly be looked at more closely. Jolovan, what do you think? I mean, you have said before that the employers should pay more, should be made to pay more for such services, not $300.
Yes, that's right. In fact, I think employers should be paying the costs of recruitment rather than the domestic worker herself. I mean, in any employment situation, any of us would find it outrageous that we had to pay our company for training, or we had to pay for all kinds of costs in relation to our recruitment. So for domestic workers, that same principle should apply.
But shouldn't the costs be mitigated? I mean, why should employers in Singapore be made to pay for the exploitation that is occurring overseas?
And this is where agencies themselves need to put in the effort and organize themselves to only work with ethical recruitment agencies in the countries of origin. And employers themselves also need to do their own research to ensure that the domestic workers they hire through these agencies are not exploited.
Jayaprema earlier mentioned education for the domestic worker herself so that she can go to proper agencies and do everything above board and not get charged to such exorbitant fees. But this can be rather challenging, right? I mean, they operate in large countries where regulation might be very difficult for the maid to understand in order for her to know where to go, what to do. So what can be done in terms of increasing awareness and education about such issues?
Well, I agree with Jaya that education is important, but education cannot be the only way in which we try and reduce this problem or resolve this problem.
Legislation.
Yes, it has to be a combination of legislation and education for it to be effective.
So legislation on the part of the source countries.
Yes, and legislation here as well.
What specific type of legislation do we need
Which
here?
is that the employers need to pay for the bulk of the costs of these recruitment fees instead of placing the burden on the domestic workers themselves.
But everything has to happen together. So the exploitation overseas has to be controlled. The fees need to be less exorbitant, if not exorbitant at all. Then you can expect employers to pay a fair fee. I wonder how you feel about this. Let's see who else is joining us now. King Ho joins us.
Hi, good morning. Yes, I have two quick points to make. Firstly, if we know that our maid is, our domestic helper is under duress because of the debt she has to pay, I think perhaps lending a helping hand, such as performance-based and co-payment thing with the helper, may help to elevate the situation. I think then the second point is actually in a lot of home countries, such as in Philippines and Indonesia, the government has a lot of vested interest in making sure that these workers who work overseas are protected. For example, Indonesia paid millions of dollars to save one of her citizens who's supposed to be beheaded in Saudi Arabia. If that can be done, I don't see how they are not keen to have a discussion, a dialogue, to talk about regulating, stopping errant maid agents in their local countries who are actually exploiting their own people. And if we don't cut off that source, I think the problem will remain, and it will never. I mean, it will forever be a sore point. And They may be some maids
Good
who are
point,
safe.
King Ho.
Yeah.
King Ho, quick question here.
Yes.
You earlier mentioned that perhaps a co-payment type of arrangement could really help out both parties, the employer and the domestic worker. Would you be willing to pay more in upfront placement fees in order to take the burden off the worker?
Definitely, because I think that this is, like previously mentioned, this is a cost that the employer has to make, like any company who decided to use a recruitment agency to recruit a manager. He will have to pay to the headhunter the cost of recruiting. I think.
All right, thank you very much for that, King Ho. Really appreciate it. Now, for one final thing, let's talk about how the industry can be professionalized here. We've seen Case Trust accreditation for employment agencies, but only a handful have this, about 30 or so. I understand that the Association of Employment Agencies is working on Trustmark, another form of accreditation. Jayaprema, what conditions do you plan to stipulate for accreditation?
Okay, for accreditation under Trustmark for AES, we are definitely looking at one of those factors that's very crucial is about advertising guidelines. Currently, a lot of employers are being misled by the kind of advertisements that they see.
And it's also quite denigrating.
Offensive.
I mean, speaking of, it's very offensive, like you said, that $1 maid banner. I mean, do we really want to come across as a country that does this?
Yes, I mean, it is very embarrassing that agencies have put up such advertisements. So this is something that we will definitely want to control or manage better. I think it is also doesn't look good on an industry to say that I sell $1. And I mean, as a professional service provider, I do not believe that our services is just valued at $1. And employers should think twice before they actually engage such an agency who wants to sell themselves so cheap. What kind of services are they going to provide if they're just going to be selling at $1?
And are you also planning on doing something about the practice that we've seen some agencies conduct, passing on the recruitment and placement costs from the overseas agencies to the maids?
Yes. Definitely. And the other thing that we're going to work on is definitely that we're going to ensure that employment agencies who are Trustmark, they will only deal with licensed agencies overseas. So this will definitely control, because they will have two sets of authorities, both cross country and Singapore, then being able to manage the licensed agencies better.
Thank you very much. But ultimately, I think if this type of accreditation does not come with legislation with teeth, it may not have much impact. It is really up to the employers to decide to go to only accredited agencies who do things above board. Now, if you have more to say about this, please continue talking to us on Facebook, Official 938 Live. Many thanks for all your phone calls. And thanks also to K. Jayaprema from the Association of Employment Agencies. She's the president. And Jolovan Wham from the Humanitarian Organization for Migration Economics. He's executive director of Home.